right, welcome everyone to another webinar presented by the C45 Quality Association. My name is Tom Ulanowski and I'm the host and moderator for you today. It is a few minutes after 12:30, so we still have a lot of people coming in. We will break over 100 participants at this rate, which is fantastic. One of our best webinars yet. So as we wait for people to come in, I'll just do a bit of introduction of the C45 Quality Association. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping and then I'll introduce our panel and we can get started because we have a lot to talk about. So my name is Tom Ulanowski and I'm the chair of the C45 Quality Association. You might have seen me on some previous webinars. I've been in the industry, the cannabis industry, in various quality and regulatory and technical roles for over 8 years now, since really the beginning of the MMPR. So a lot of fond memories, and I'm pleased to be hosting everyone today. The C45 Quality Association is quite unique as far as an industry association goes in this industry. We are a non-for-profit organization, and what's most important is we're membership backed. So whereas some other industry associations are corporate backed, they have companies such as license holders as members. We represent individuals, people that work in the sector primarily as quality assurance, quality control people, those that work in labs as consultants in the regulatory space. So we represent those people. We have over 150 professionals as members that we represent, and that number has doubled over the last year. So very proud of what we've done. And what we like to do as an industry association is a number of things. Primarily, we like to hold a healthy discourse about the current topics in this space. We like to do that with these free public webinars. Sometimes we have them for members only, but this one is free and will be recorded as well for everyone to enjoy after the fact. We also do other types of events. We have an annual summit, but because of COVID, we've had to postpone that for a number of years, but we're hoping at some point in the near future to bring that back. And of course, we engage with various regulators, primarily Health Canada. We've actually had the opportunity to sit down with them in person and virtually twice over a few hours each this past year and provide feedback in person or in writing thereafter. And they've been really receptive to that. And we really are fortunate to have that connection there because, again, our feedback comes from our members who are working, living and breathing with the regulations that we have to work within in Canada every day. So if you'd like to learn more, you can check out our website, c45association.com. We are active on Twitter and YouTube. We will be posting this this video on YouTube, and we have a backlog of archives of our events, which we're currently updating. So yeah, check us out and please consider becoming a member. You don't have to be employed actively as a quality or regulatory professional, but you can just join as a student for $49 a year, a non-voting member for $99 a year. And if you are actively employed in a quality testing license holder capacity, you can be a voting member for $199. So please check it out and look forward to hosting many more of these in the future. So before we begin, just a bit of housekeeping. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So if you can't focus right now, you'll be able to catch this and share this in the coming days and weeks. We have structured this panel so that our talking heads will have the floor for the first hour, and then we're going to try to leave at least 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So we'll be doing about a 75-minute webinar here right now. Throughout the talk, throughout the panel, please use the Q&A box on your Zoom client to ask questions to the panel. Those are public and you can upvote them, so please interact. We want this to be as interactive as possible. And again, generally chatter can happen in the chat box as well, especially any technical issues. So I think that pretty much covers it. Again, welcome everyone. We are at 100 people right now. Fantastic. And I'd like to get going here on this panel. So today's webinar, the topic is a panel discussion on the report of the Science Advisory Committee on Health Products Containing Cannabis. This report was released just last week or 2 weeks ago on July 28th from the Science Advisory Committee on Health Products Containing Cannabis. And there's a link in the chat box, and I'll throw that link in after so you can follow along. This report generally provides recommendations on how Canadians can safely access potential products for the short-term treatment of minor ailments through self-care. It discusses both humans and animals. We are primarily discussing humans today, but we will touch on dogs and other animals as well. And really, this report generally tries to support the development of appropriate safety, quality, and efficacy standards for products containing cannabis. So many of us in the industry have a lot of questions, whether you're a cannabis or hemp grower, or processor, distributor, pharmacist, retail store owner, testing lab, consultant, and we're here to answer them. So I've invited a number of guests, some of which we've hosted before. I'd love for them to turn on their videos right now, and I'd like to introduce them. First, we have Dr. Shane Morris, who's the CEO of Morris & Associates Consulting. We have Trina, Fraser, a partner at Brazeau Seller LLP, and Deepak Anand, founder of Materia Ventures. So I'm sure those in industry don't need them to introduce themselves, but some of you may want to know who these talking heads are. So Shane, Deepak, and Trina, in that order. Keep it under a minute, but let us know who you are, and thanks again for joining us. Shane, you're muted.
Oh, always the same. Thanks very much, Tom. Really appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion, and definitely always hard to keep up with Deepak and Trina on these things, so, but I'll try my best. So my background is, besides being the most boring person in cannabis, I have a background of about 15 years in the federal government. Did a range of things on the regulatory side, primarily all the way to regulatory policy, including supporting cabinet on regulatory initiatives. I've got an academic, and I've been in the cannabis space since 2015. Originally started with Hexo, Hydropothecary at the time. I was the QAP and there, building out that from a startup scenario, and then I went over to Aurora Cannabis. Did about 2.5 years with Aurora Cannabis. Rolled out a lot on the Cannabis 2.0 side and all the regulatory work as well internationally. And in the last 2 years, I've been out on my own and working with a lot of clients, primarily on product development.
Awesome, thanks, Shane. Deepak, introduction for yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. Deepak Anand here. I've been around the cannabis industry, much like Tom, played several different roles for quite a few years now, counting 8+. Worked with a number of license holders on applications, licensing. I sit on the board of Medical Cannabis Canada. I founded a couple of businesses on both the consulting side as well as the EU GMP side internationally. Very happy to be here today and really break down the CBD report that was recently released by Health Canada, and look forward to the discussion. Thanks for having me, and thanks for C45 putting this together.
Thanks, Deepak. Always a pleasure. And last but certainly not least, Trina, please, for those that you don't know, which I don't know at this point how no one can know you, but who are you and what do you do, and what do you bring to the table here?
I'm the completion of the perfect trifecta here. We've got the brainy scientist in Shane, we've got the savvy international business tycoon in Deepak, and then you've got the annoying lawyer delivering all the bad news in me. So it's very, I'm completing the circle. Yeah, I've been, I guess delivering, I hope, creative compliance solutions to license holders, producers, and retailers, well, all the way since 2013 now. So my practice is pretty much exclusively cannabis-based, a combination of commercial B2B agreements and regulatory compliance work.
Fantastic. Yes, and it's always good to have a lawyer on our side so thanks for being here. Okay, so the three of you were, like we were kind of discussing beforehand, we really want to jump into this report. The report, for those of you that have not read it in our audience here, it is a must read, especially if you're somehow involved in this industry. It's quite clear about what recommendations they have, and we're going to break down those recommendations. There are about 10. The first 6 are really, I guess, the meat of the document we'll focus on. But I think it's important for all of us to have context here about, from the ground up, what is CBD and what's the current state of affairs here in Canada. So I'll pose the first question. I'll leave it kind of open. Feel free for anyone to take this one on. But what is CBD? Why are we talking about CBD today? Feel free to jump in, anyone.
Well, as the non-polite Irish person, I will jump over to Canadians and basically answer your question. Look, CBD is a highly important cannabinoid. It has been regulated currently in Canada under the Cannabis Act. And the cannabis regulations thereafter. It makes up a very large portion of the Canadian cannabis market, and it also makes up a huge international component of US cannabinoid industry space. So CBD, as many of you might know, has ability to be able to be produced from hemp grown in the US. There is movements in the UK on CBD to deregulate it from THC, especially under the UK's approach to post-novel foods, post the EU Brexit process. So certainly, from my perspective, it's a highly important product. It's also important from a pharmaceutical perspective. We've seen elements of research and being able to produce products such as Epidiolex, and we've certainly seen a lot of work with CBD in pediatric syndromes such as untreatable Dravet's, etc., and epilepsy. So certainly it's a highly important compound, and it's been, in my opinion, managed as cannabis because it comes from the cannabis plant or hemp plant, so whichever way you want to look at that. But you're seeing now progressively it being stripped away from THC and other cannabinoids as regulatory organizations and jurisdictions try to open up opportunities around CBD. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I mean, generally, it's a major cannabinoid. There's a lot of interest on it, scientifically, medically, and here in Canada, we currently have a system that allows for the sale of CBD. We have for quite some time. Trina or Deepak and Shane, let's talk a bit about what the current state of affairs is. Maybe a little bit of historical context, but where are we at currently with CBD and generally cannabis here in Canada today?
I'm happy to speak to that because I do get asked about this all the time, and I can't even count the number of times I've sent people that have contacted me links to the Health Canada page on its website talking about the regulation of CBD, because there's so much misinformation out there. There's so much misunderstanding and this kind of prevailing misperception that somehow we, materially treat CBD differently than THC and other cannabinoids, like many other countries do. But the fact is that, rightly or wrongly, CBD currently is pretty much lumped in with THC and all other components and all other cannabinoids contained within the cannabis plant. There's a few very, very minor distinctions where, the amount of CBD in the product maybe is not capped like it is with THC. There may be an issue as to whether you have to put the standardized cannabis symbol on the package when we're talking about CBD products, and excise duty. So, but otherwise, who can produce, who can cultivate, hemp aside, is basically the same. And there is something I pulled out because I wanted to refresh my memory on where this whole concept of CHPs started. So as we're talking about the report, to set the context, go all the way back to November 2017. The federal government released a document called the Proposed Approach to the Regulation of Cannabis. And in that document, it said a new pathway is proposed for NHP submissions containing products derived from cannabis flowers containing cannabinoids such as CBD. To minimize the risk of psychoactivity, the same 10 parts per million THC limit would be applied to such products. These submissions would be required to demonstrate robust safety and efficacy evidence under the NHP regulatory framework. Okay, that was almost 5 years ago. So fast forward to the report we're going to be talking about today. If you keep that statement in mind, you should be feeling a bit of deja vu, because we've basically taken 5 years to almost come in a complete circle back to where we were in November of 2017.
Sounds very Canadian, Trina. Thank you. So Deepak, maybe I'll get a little bit of just a pop quiz here. Who in Canada currently today can cultivate or produce CBD? Who do you have to be in Canada?
Yeah, so I think as Trina outlined, I think you've got to be licensed under the Cannabis Act to actually start to cultivate CBD, but more importantly, actually start to distribute the product as well as sell the product. So, a license holder under the Cannabis Act needs permission to be able to not only cultivate it, but also then process these products and put it on the market. I think one of the things I wanted to highlight around just the basics of CBD, I think this is one of probably the biggest things that gets me every time I look at an article is people say that CBD is not psychoactive. One thing I want to really put out there is I think people can confuse psychoactivity from psychotropic activities. And so, the one thing that I'd like to say to everybody taking away from this session is CBD is psychoactive. And I think what people mostly mean when they're trying to create that difference is differentiating from THC, which is intoxicating or psychotropic. So it's very important for people to realize that CBD is psychoactive, and that's a good thing in many cases. It doesn't really mean that it is intoxicating. So that's one of the things that I wanted to really place on the record.
Awesome. Yeah. And also it has drug-drug interactions, just like any molecule or potential for them. So again, it's not benign, right? There is obviously a lot of benefits, but there's also a lot of challenges and things we have to consider. So Deepak mentioned you can be a hemp grower, you can be a cannabis cultivator, you grow the plants, or you can synthesize them, I guess, through other yeast or other kind of measures. But generally, you produce this molecule CBD, you have to have a license holder. The same regulatory umbrella requires you to extract, refine, formulate, pack and fill and label and distribute. All of that is captured as a cultivator or processor under the Cannabis Act and regulations. And then I think the most important thing, and this is where we're kind of going to compare where we're at in Canada versus the world, but also what this report is looking at or recommending, is the distribution, the retail side or the medical side. Shane or anyone else, really, do you want to discuss very quickly what that currently looks like? Where can someone go get CBD today? And then we'll contrast that with the rest of the world and what this report is talking about.
Yeah, I can just quickly hit on that. So basically, we have a system where CBD today it can be delivered through channels that have been developed by the Cannabis Act and Cannabis regulations, which is essentially for humans, it will be recreational cannabis through the cannabis stores, or it will be through the medical channels that license holders have developed and built out. There is no option for animal use at this time. However, there are some very smart license holders who have actually products out there, such as CBD oil called Canine and Bacon Oil, which is really smart, and I like that product. So it's technically perfectly viable for human use, using a bacon flavor, but there is that option. So right now in Canada, that's the only option that you have at this point. And there is questions. We can't even import it for medical use as well. So that's another whole area that we could get into very quickly, but certainly it's very restricted. And this whole report was supposed to be able to give some scientific background to the 2017, as Trina rightly corrects, 5 years ago, which is a long time in cannabis time, some background to be able to provide some options around regulatory instrument choice etc., for the regulators to move this forward. And I remember speaking to regulators in 2017, 2018, when will these CBD cannabis health products regulations come through? And I can tell you, hand on heart, they were punting this long, that they had no interest in expanding the access to CBD outside to what they were running really fast to develop in the recreational space.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, many of us in the industry or watching the industry have been waiting patiently or impatiently for something like this. And, you know, I think all of us can agree that we definitely felt ahead of the curve here in Canada, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago when we had, you know, the MMPR, ACMPR, the Cannabis Act and regs. But now it seems to an extent that the world has kind of moved on, and we're still here in Canada twiddling our thumbs, like with recommendations to regulations. So, Deepak, I'll just bring it back to you. You're someone who has experience across the pond in Europe, building a company. Can someone quickly, or Deepak, can you compare what CBD looks like in Canada versus the US, our neighbor to the south, or Europe? And I know Europe is a big place, but just give us a high level synthesis of how it's treated differently, and that may include import and export as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, you know, as Trina pointed out, we've lumped CBD into this category, which is effectively the same as THC in terms of the way that we regulate it, which is very different from how the rest of the world treats CBD. And in my opinion, I think we've lost to a great extent already the first mover advantage when it comes to CBD products, particularly when you compare us with the United States and in many cases Europe, and I'll get into Europe in 1 second. I think in the US, if you look at this, you know, it's effectively descheduled. You know, the US DEA has allowed for import and exports to take place of CBD products. Obviously, we know cannabis generally isn't legal on a federal level, but notwithstanding that, CBD and its legality, you know, it's very common in many US states to find CBD products everywhere. So I think that when you contrast that with Canada, of course, we've treated this in a highly restrictive category. And generally, I think on a global basis, people, for better or worse, want access to CBD. And people, as we've seen, will get access to CBD one way or the other if we don't allow for its deregulation. So I think the time has, you know, far past us with respect to having this conversation around the descheduling, if you will, or regulating of CBD products in mainstream or commercial channels. Europe's sort of been all over the place. I'll decouple the UK and Europe, not only because of Brexit, but also on the CBD regulations. It's quite different. We've seen EFSA, which is the UK Food Standards Authority, basically now start to you know, not only get licenses for under novel foods, which is where CBD is regulated, but also approve applications now for hundreds of companies and products that have passed the validation phase of the UK FSA regulatory environment under which CBD product can be sold. We've seen Amazon in the UK most notably allow the sale of CBD products. There is obviously a much more robust regulatory system that is being put into place and enforcement that's coming into place by the FSA. But notwithstanding that, CBD is everywhere in a market like the UK. You know, you can go to a grocery store, you can go to a pharmacy chain, you can go to a gas station, pick up CBD effectively anywhere. And I think that's what the market really wants and needs. And I think the same applies in Canada. You know, whether we in the industry feel CBD works or not is an entirely different question. The fact that people want access to it, I think, is an important factor. Europe, unfortunately, generally has gone 2 steps ahead, 4 steps back kind of situation, where the European FSA has had various positions on this. They still hold the position that it is a novel food, and therefore you need to apply for a novel foods application. They have not yet validated any applications for CBD, and the requirements, in my opinion, are quite stringent on what they are requiring for CBD products to be sold. But notwithstanding all of that, we're seeing CBD products become available in many European countries. I think there's been a hardline approach in some European countries where it's a complete no-no, but other countries have sort of allowed for the proliferation, if you will, of CBD products. So that's a bit of a landscape on the international side. The one thing I did want to point out was Australia almost 2 years ago has already done what Canada is intending to do, which is approach CBD as this OTC product. And there was a lot of research and there was a lot of information that was put in by the TGA in coming to that position. So a lot of the stuff that we'll be discussing today with respect to the consultation, there's a bunch of documents on the TGA website that already talk about the scientific approach. All of these things that Health Canada is asking for today has already been done. And quite frankly, I was hoping that the Scientific Advisory Committee would have looked at what the TGA has done, because it mirrors the approach that we're trying to take here. So hopefully that answers your question, Tom.
It does, and it brings up a few more. And Trina, I'm going to turn it to you in 1 second. No pressure, but I'm just going to ask you to provide us with a high-level synthesis of this 28-page document.
Okay.
But Deepak, before I'll let Trina prepare for that for a minute. But essentially, Deepak, you brought up a few good points, but the most important one, and this is something that came up kind of in our pre-panel huddle, who here in Canada is responsible for this consultation? And Shane, feel free to also chime in here, but I think that's important for people to know as we're going to jump into this report in a minute.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that, I've got a bunch of questions around, Health Canada. I think people generally lump Health Canada into this one entity, which it is from, generally as an organization. But when it comes to cannabis, it's very important for people to understand that there are two branches, there's several branches within Health Canada, but with respect to this conversation, there is a Controlled Substances and Cannabis branch, CSCB, which is effectively does everything Cannabis Act related. And then there is something called HFPB, which is the Health Food and Products branch. This consultation is being done by the HFPB. More specifically, it's being done by the NNHP, which is the Natural and Non-Prescription Health Products Directorate. So I think people need to keep in mind who the target audience is. I think when people are putting their submissions in or having discussions or conversations, it's important to keep in mind that you're not having this discussion necessarily with the cannabis folk. You're having this discussion with the NNHPD department, which falls under HFPB. Now, of course, there's a lot of overlap that happens between these two entities within Health Canada itself, but it's important to not lose sight of that context as to who is actually conducting this consultation. I'm sure Shane will have more to add on this.
Yeah, I just want to add, more importantly, the assistant deputy ministers, who is the senior leadership in Health Canada, several assistant deputy ministers, they're different branches. It's not like there's two branches. There's one deputy who's really busy, this is way down on his list. Don't forget, we're post-COVID, monkeypox, just on this grand scheme of risk, and that's how Health Canada approaches issues. This is way down there. Very important for us, multi-million-dollar industry, but it's, Deepak's 100% right. You're dealing with it seen here in Ottawa, some cross-fertilization, and there's a little bit more, getting both sides on a call when you need to have them. We had this with edibles in 2018, 2019, when all this came to be both sides. Understand what was going on. People talk to me going, okay, it's on the regular reform plan till 2014. I would be, as a long-term bureaucrat and part of the team that actually helped develop this national policy on the transparency and regulatory reform plans, I can tell you there is a very enough to do. Is actually, if you go to the website, there is what to include in a regulatory reform plan. Could be anything that, even if you're going to pre-publication CG1 in the next 24 months, that can be included. So in theory, Health Canada could just go to pre-publication of the draft regulations up to sometime in 24, right? But the issue is that sometimes to go from CG1 to CG2 can be up to 18 months. So there's no guarantee that we're seeing any rapid movement here now. I know people see 70 days of consultation now post this report. I would argue that this report is actually quite weak from a scientific perspective, and could have been done in-house. Health Canada certainly has the ability to do that. Now, open transparency, I have published with academically with at least one member, with Dan Hernick, who's one of the experts on this report. And not that I have talked to him about this issue at all, but I can tell you that I was pretty disappointed, quite frankly, and I am concerned that we're going to see continued dragging of the feet for a longer term. This is not, unfortunately, a priority, and I think it's up to everyone on this call to help make this a priority.
Thanks, Shane. And just so you know, I think there's some technical issues there with your video. So apologies to everyone, but generally we can gather what you're saying. So appreciate that, Deepak and Shane. Okay, so let's delve into this report for the next 30 so odd minutes before we do some Q&A. Trina, talk to us high level. What are your feeling about this report? What was the scope? What does it cover? And then we'll get right into the recommendations. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Sure. Just circling back to what we were talking about, which is how is CBD regulated currently. I just wanted to add, in addition to the rec and the medical streams, obviously we also do have the category of cannabis drugs, right? Which is easy to overlook because I think there's only one cannabis drug on the market currently containing any CBD, which is Sativex, and also has THC in it, but basically for a very narrow indication of use to manage spasticity in multiple sclerosis patients. So that's basically it. That's all we have today. And obviously the mountains you have to climb with Health Canada for DIN approval of new drugs is quite challenging, especially in the context of cannabinoids and cannabis. And so that category has been pretty stagnant. And so, I think what I have heard and seen, comments coming out of Health Canada that the CHP route is kind of the answer almost to the complaints that have been made about how difficult it is to get approval of cannabis drugs. Well, you can just go this route instead. And there was a question asked about, does it matter if CBD comes from a hemp plant or a cannabis plant? And really the answer is no. Once that flower, you can obviously grow approved cultivars of hemp as a hemp farmer that are rich in CBD. And once you harvest those flowers, though, the only thing you can do with them as a hemp farmer right now is sell them to a cannabis processor. And in that cannabis processor's hands, it doesn't matter if that came from a hemp plant on a field or from a cannabis plant in a greenhouse. It's treated exactly the same way at that point. But it is a live question, I think, to ask, where is all of the CBD coming from that's going to be used as the inputs in these products moving forward? And are they all going to be obtained from cannabis processors? Is there going to be some form of more direct route available from hemp farmers? Are cannabis producers going to be the ones making these products, or is it going to be more akin to NHP producers with site licenses? Like, all of these things have yet to be determined. So, that's where we are today, but still unclear where we're going to ultimately end up.
And that's not even really touched on in the report, right? They do mention that those are challenges to overcome, but those are not part of the recommendations at all. That's
right. There's obviously really kind of brief passing references to where they think these products should be sold, but not, and also, the maybe standards that should be met in producing them, but not necessarily who should be producing them pursuant to what type of license under what regulatory framework. And, so going back to the report now, obviously this was a committee that was formed through there was a public nomination and kind of an appointment process that was followed to create this committee that met over a pretty extended period of time. It sounds like entirely virtually during the pandemic. And, I'm sure the pandemic didn't help the timing on this committee fulfilling its mandate in producing this report. But in any case, definitely, I agree, it's been a long time coming. And, the purpose of the report if you look back to the initial consultation document from Health Canada, was to provide obviously scientific advice on, you know, the safety, efficacy, quality type standards that should be set for cannabis health products. You know, right at the outset of the report, the scope of it was narrowed, you know, in its scope, and, you know, immediately all cannabinoids other than CBD were excluded. You know, the committee apparently unanimously felt that any intoxicating cannabinoids were off the table, not appropriate for self-care. Not really much discussion about why other non-intoxicating, non-psychotropic cannabinoids like CBN, CBG weren't included. I guess we can infer that they felt there wasn't insufficient evidence on the safety and efficacy of those cannabinoids.
I think they did state that. I think they
Yeah.
said that, you know, the minor cannabinoids, they're aware of them, but there is
Not
really
enough.
a lot
Well,
of body.
I mean, and that was an overall theme, I think, even obviously with CBD, that, you know, there was a, you know, so like a complaint by the committee that although there is this abundance of literature out there, it is difficult to distill specific, you know, format recommendations, dosing recommendations, etc. from, because, you know, it's not always clear when you're, you know, looking at these source materials, what was the source of the what was the format of the CBD, what, you know, even what dose was provided over what period of time. There was not an ability really to compare apples to apples very consistently in a thorough way. So, you know, certainly the overall, and this is one of the recommendations within the report, is that we need more research, and the government needs to facilitate research so that we can continue to build this body of evidence. So, you know, even if we do end up in a place where CHPs are initially limited to CBD only, you know, the hope would be that the body of evidence on other minor cannabinoids could continue to grow to the point where there would be a case to make that there is sufficient evidence on its their safety and efficacy to include in this, you know, new category of products as well. I think also we've decided to not go too much into animals today, right, Tom? We've decided for the most part that we'll just stick to the recommendations as they apply to human use products. But, you know, essentially CBD only, and you know, when you really boil it down to its absolute kind of substantive recommendation terms, what they recommended was and found was that CBD is safe and tolerable for short-term use, which to them meant up to 30 days, at doses from 20 to 200 milligrams per day, for oral administration only, not smoking or vaping in otherwise healthy adults, you know, for certain specified limited 3 indications, and only in an environment where if you're taking other medications, you have the opportunity to discuss possible drug interaction with your pharmacist, hence the recommendation to make these products available for sale in pharmacies only, which is actually contrary to what the initial consultation document said, because the initial consultation document proposed that CHPs be sold in the same place and in the same way as all other cannabis products. Now, also adding that there could be an add-on to that where they could also be available perhaps in pharmacies, but that would be in addition to being available for sale by existing medical sellers and in current retail stores. So that's one example of where the recommendations in the report differ actually from what was proposed in the initial consultation document.
Thanks, Trina, and everyone. Yeah, so I mean, the scope of the report, to kind of summarize, is we're talking about adults that are healthy. If you're a dog, maybe. If you're a cat or a horse, forget it. We're talking about purified CBD2. Well, at least the report was 98+% purity at that point. We're talking about an isolate. So, you know, broad spectrum, full spectrum products are not part of kind of their recommendations. So let's just jump right into these recommendations. There's 10 recommendations. We'll cover the first 6, which are for humans, and there's kind of 3 for dogs, and then 1 overarching kind of call for more research. But the first recommendation, and people can follow along with the link in the report, is regarding dosage. So, you know, the great thing, or I think the very positive outcome of this report, was that they were very clear that they believe, like you said, that CBD is safe and tolerable for up to 30 days for, up to 200 milligrams per day for a person ingested orally. Does anyone want to comment on this recommendation? And I mean, I guess from the perspective of right now in the Cannabis Act and regulations, there are no CBD limits. There's limits on THC. There are limits on quantities for like total quantities of substance. You can have 30 grams equivalent dried cannabis for every order or purchase you have. But does anyone want to discuss this? Do you agree with this? Do you disagree? Do you find any issues with the 20 to 200 milligram a day limit for oral administration only? The floor is yours, everyone. We can go from there.
I'll take a quick shot at it first if my internet stays static. Thank you, Rogers. And I'm on a landline, which is worse. So first thing I have to say, this is the 200 milligram per day is very positive compared to what we saw out of the UK, and where they had indicated that 70 milligrams a day was what they were recommending as a limit, and that was taken up by the European Food Safety Authority as well, EFSA, in their most recent reports on this issue. So certainly it's good to see that 70 milligram per day has been pushed beyond, which is good. One thing I think is super important for people to remember is that, and you'll have to imagine a world where this cannabis health product is, you'll in theory may be able to claim an actual functionality, right? So and that's where it's quite different than just going into onto the OCS website. No, you can't get onto the OCS website on order, but that's a whole different ballgame. But going into a cannabis store and ordering, say, MediFarm's cannabis CBD isolate, where you get 1,000 milligrams for X amount, and there's no actual utility applied to that. So cannabis health products are going to be like natural health products, where you will, in theory, if there is a monograph, and one would assume that will have to be created, that you will be able to make some claims. And that's going to be an important piece. And that's why I think when people freak out on the 20 milligrams per day, 200 milligrams per day, sorry, I think you're seeing the intent of these regulations would be that they would be more akin to a natural health product. So where in those cases, so for example, you've got melatonin as a natural health product in Canada. Not everywhere, by the way, across the world. Melatonin is highly regulated in many jurisdictions, and you've got a max of 10 milligrams orally. Recommendation of that monograph, but you can make a claim around sleep aid. So I think the real power of this and the 200 milligrams, sorry, is going to be that key area around claims. And I think that's where it's going to get interesting in the regulatory drafting.
The one thing, Tom, I just wanted to also add was, not only is it better than Europe, but it's also better than Australia. So just to give people an idea, in Australia, they were initially proposing 60 milligrams per day. They then upped that to 150 milligrams per day with respect to OTC usage. So I think there is some progress there. This is definitely higher than a lot of the other countries. I think we're probably the highest on the OTC pathway at 200 milligrams per day. So that's certainly a positive outcome from a scientific perspective.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Deepak and Shane. Trina, unless there's anything to add, and absolutely if you'd like, but I'm being mindful of our time. We have about 15 or 20 minutes left until we get into Q&A, and we have a 5 more to go. So let's move on to recommendation B. This recommendation centers around warning statements for interactions with the drugs, for those that are pregnant, that may have allergies. Any issues with the proposed or recommended labeling guidelines? My opinion is it's probably a good thing until we know more. The question still remains, how do we know what interactions CBD has with drugs? Are we very confident with that? Should we be putting on warning labels when there is an absence of evidence just purely based on on the potential risk without maybe having that much data? So let's chat about the recommendation B, and we'd love to hear from all of you. Trina, maybe you're a lawyer. You deal with risk a lot, and making sure people stay on the right side of the legal law. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one area that we can expect we're going to err on the side of caution. And I wasn't certainly put off or fussed by that recommendation. To me, that just makes sense. I know in the physicians and pharmacists that I've spoken to about CBD use seem to have a pretty good handle on the particular medications that they know have the potential for interaction with CBD, and how to kind of dose around that or work within those parameters. Obviously, again, I don't think the science is complete at this point. And so, I think it's not that we're going to only put a warning on if we know something is harmful. I think the point is we're going to put a warning on unless we know comfortably that it is safe. So.
Yeah, I would add to that. We already have warnings on CBD, so for me, it doesn't move the need that much. What is interesting is the fact that they want to have, and this may be in a second recommendation, insert in a box. So yeah, the pamphlet in a box, that's an interesting. So that's more to a, you don't see it in natural health products as much, but you do see it in hardcore medical pharma. So it's an interesting proposal. I'd be interested to see how Canada as regulators handle it, because now you're forcing people into a production style and boxes and labels, and we've had a pretty hard experience around packaging in cannabis to date. So it'd be interesting to see how they handle that.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. And is anyone able to very quickly talk about the potential CBD drug-drug interactions? Because we get this a lot in the industry, in the natural health product industry. Oh, cannabis is natural; it's totally safe. That is an appeal to nature or naturalistic fallacy, and we know that a drug is a drug, a molecule is a molecule. Some are benign, some have risks. We have to study them for various populations and in various interactions. What are the issues with CBD now? Just so people are aware, if they are dabbling with CBD on an adult use recreational level and taking other drugs.
Yeah, I can add to that real quick, and I won't go into the full full process and full lit review on this, but personally, I would, any cannabinoid, THC, CBD, anything, if I'm on prescription medications, I would certainly be having that discussion with my pharmacist around, that use. Just that's for me just common sense as a scientist. There are obviously implications around certain types of medications, especially around in the mental health space, CBD and interactions on that front. There's some concerns, obviously high risk categories as well, people lactating, pregnant, young children, they're high risk categories as well from perspective, but risk nevertheless. And there are people with hypersensitivities and allergies to cannabis. I've seen it myself with workers and working side by side with people milling flower, and all of a sudden their eyes go and their noses go, and they have to put on masks and they have to be removed from production facilities space that they're doing the milling. Certainly I've seen that happen, and people become sensitized. You see that in very natural products as well, such as penicillin. I've worked in pharmaceutical facilities where it's handled penicillin, and certainly there, you can work there for 20 years and then one day you're going to develop allergenicity to penicillin and you're done. Like, you cannot work in that facility anymore. So it's an interesting space, and I think what they're applying here is the tip in regulatory terms. It's called the precautionary principle, and I think it's how that interacts with the proper smart regulations and things that make sense. Because in this particular case, you're going to be able to get CHPs in this style packaging and pamphlets, but then you can go and still going into a cannabis store and get 100% pure CBD off the shelf. So it's going to be a very strange coexistence of two product types.
Indeed, it will be. And I'm also one of those people that have hypersensitivities to cannabis if it's being mailed around me. So I think it's a great thing. It can't hurt, and I'd rather employ the precautionary principle. Deepak, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, just two things I was going to quickly add. I recall seeing a Harvard Medical School publication around furthering what Shane said with respect to other medications. I think the two things that particular study from 2021 said: one, CBD has the potential to double up on side effects of other medications, and the second was altering the effects of other drugs. So I think, as Shane pointed out, two things people want to consider on the pharmaceutical side is if you're taking other pharmaceutical products, there are implications CBD has on the effects of some of those pharmaceutical products. So people want to be cautious of that, and I think that's where this is coming from. That's
great. Thanks, Deepak. And yeah, as an industry, we should be always cautious, especially starting out. It's better to do that than to have a PR nightmare and hurt people. So recommendation C, let's jump into that quickly. That's a very simple one. I hope none of you are opposed to clear dosing instructions and warnings of side effects. The question is, where would these side effect recommendations come from? I guess, is that going to be, does that have to be determined by, for example, the processor or distributor, or is that going to come from a monograph, standard kind of verbiage from the regulator? Any indications of what this will look like, or if this recommendation were to be followed?
I think it's going to be up to the NPN holder. I would assume that this would follow an NPN pathway where you would get a national product registration number, much like a DIN number. So it would be up to the holder of that particular NPN number that would have to demonstrate the various applications of these products on. Of course, we'll know as Health Canada outlines a regulatory pathway on what that specifically means. But if I compare this to NHP regulations, I think it'll be up to the NPN holder as opposed to our traditional cannabis processor or cultivator. I don't think the liability is going to sit with them. It's going to be with the NPN holder.
And just to add to that, I suspect you will have to apply for a CHP number like you have to do for an NHP number. So there will be a back and forth and probably fascinating conversation between the person submitting that application to Health Canada and reviewers in Health Canada.
Thank you for that. Trina, anything to add there?
The same question had been running through my mind because, we're talking about an entire kind of category of regulation that is built around, one molecule, like one substance, CBD. However, it's going to, we've already seen in the rec and the, medical markets take an infinite number of different forms and formats and types of products. And so I am curious and to see how Health Canada is going to approach that, whether it is going to want to be more prescriptive with dosing information and, prescribed warnings and things of that nature, to ensure kind of consistency and that a certain kind of threshold to their satisfaction is met, or if they are going to, subject to their approval, obviously let each individual, seller and producer make it up on their own.
And Tom, I also just wanted to highlight really quickly, I think there's, I've certainly been flooded by a number of questions on both LinkedIn and Twitter around what does this mean? I think it's very important for people to understand this is creating a third pathway. This is not taking CBD away from the current proposal with respect to where it can be sold, in terms of cannabis license holders, both on the medical cannabis side that can still be able to sell it medically through the medical channel, the way it currently works by mail to patients. It also still permits retailers to be able to sell CBD products, I think, as Shane outlined, but this now creates a third pathway from pharmacies and veterinarians. So I just wanted to outline that, because I know there's been quite a bit of confusion in the industry as to, is this taking CBD away from the status quo? And it's not. It's adding an additional channel.
Yeah, it's two things really. It's adding an additional channel, and I think the most important, we've had a little discussion on Twitter not too long ago about this. I think that the big one is right now in the industry, in cannabis, there are no claims being made. In fact, you can't make claims unless you go the drug license route and put out a formal pharmaceutical product. In the pharmaceutical industry, the gold standard for studies in order to go through phase clinical trials is to have and get this approved, is to have randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trials, which are expensive and take a long time. When we're talking about claims or we're talking about warnings, and we're taking into consideration we have CBD with different excipients and bioavailability and carrier oils and potentially routes of administration, I think people are excited by the fact that there's going to be a new part of the industry to kind of create and distribute CBD. But what kind of timelines and costs do we see in the NHP world to bring a product to market? Because it's not overnight. The advantage of our current industry is Shane can dream up a product, and as long as he submits an NNCP 60 days later, it's on a shelf somewhere. There is true speed to market. I didn't want to trigger you with the NNCP stuff, Shane, but let's just discuss. We have a few minutes. The rest of the recommendations are really about labeling, warning, adverse reactions. I do want to tackle the pharmacy aspect of it at the end before we open up to Q&A. But let's just talk about what it would take a product to market. What does it take financially and time-wise? And I'll open it up to the floor, whoever wants to raise their hand.
Yeah, look, I think it depends, right? The NHPs, for example, for going to market, if you're leveraging a pre-existing monograph and you're saying, your dosage in this format does this at this level, there's not much more you need. You have to submit an NHP process to Health Canada submission. You have to have that conversation and you get an NHP number. So this concept of a monograph will be very new to a lot of cannabis people. But that's, but if you want to create your own new product, or if you don't want to rely on the monograph, then, or you want to create your own monograph or your own master file, as it's called in the NHP side, you've got to do a lot more work. So, there's a spectrum, and I hate to sound complicated on it, but it's not, it's not one or the other. It's not easy or it's not long. It depends where you want to position your product and SKU in the market.
And it is actually connected to the very last issue that we were discussing about CBD products still being available for sale in the already existing cannabis channels, because depending, I see two kind of competing issues here. How complex, how costly, how time consuming is it going to be to get CHPs to market? And what is the preference of consumers going to be for where they would like to go to buy CBD? Are we going to see the majority of people want to buy them in pharmacies? Are they going to want to buy them in cannabis stores? Or are we going to see it all across the board? What is the demand for buying CBD in a cannabis retail store going to be if CHPs are available in pharmacies? And I'm not sure how that's all going to flush out at the end of the day and where we're going to land. But, if a company is kind of, again, this is all premised also on uncertainty around who is going to be making these products and what type of license are they going to have to hold to make these products. But if we say, for the just sake of example for a moment, that cannabis processors will also be able to make CHPs or tack on another layer of license to make CHPs, and they're making production decisions about which route to go. Those are all the types of factors I think they're going to have to take into account.
Yeah, I would add one thing to that very quickly for Trina, is that maybe you don't need to make a claim, right? This NHP piece will be very interesting. Right now on the market, there is CBD and melatonin, right? It's perfectly, one is an NHP, melatonin, and one is a cannabinoid. Now, there's no claim on it, but most people will understand what melatonin is. So do you actually have to make a claim? There's a halo effect. So if you call something like nightcaps, which just hit the market in OCS this week with melatonin and CBD, it's called nightcaps. It's got CBD, it's got melatonin. Do you need to make a formal claim on that? Probably not. For the consumer to understand what its use case is, what the need state is, and what the experience will be.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen Health Canada stretching quite a bit in compliance letters on inferred claims, therapeutic claims, health claims lately. So, you know, how far you can push that concept and how much you can get away with it remains to be seen. But yes, point taken.
I also want to just highlight something that Trina brought up earlier, is how realistic is this regime going to be? Because, you know, now we have the benefit of looking at other regulatory systems, and you look at Australia, which, you know, I referenced a few times. Whilst they've created an OTC pathway for CBD to be sold at 150 milligrams a day, up to 150 milligrams a day, there really hasn't been any product in the market 2 years later, because people just aren't going to go through the strict process to launch this product, and they're definitely not going to go through that process in a market like Canada, where you can just, you know, put a product effectively on the shelf very quickly. So it's going to be incumbent on kind of decision makers at Health Canada to look at where Australia might have gotten that wrong, and where do we want to put this so it's a bit more balanced with respect to either existing entrants or new entrants coming into the market that will apply for these products and will actually want to put a product and take it through commercialization.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's really about how much value is attached to the ability to put that claim on the package, and how much value is attached to the ability to put that product on a pharmacy shelf, right? And then that's the cost benefit analysis that's going to have to be undertaken.
So
if it needs to be on a pharmacy shelf.
Well, let's get into that. This last recommendation, then we have about 10 minutes for questions. I'll remind everyone, there's a Q&A box. We have you know, half a dozen or so we'll try to get through them really quickly. But yeah, the last recommendation, F, that we're going to talk about, talks about labels and having directions for adverse reaction reporting, having an easy way to report adverse reactions, having those inserts or little leaflets that Shane mentioned earlier. I think we can pretty much all agree, I would hope, but then the industry would agree that that's probably fine if that happens, not a huge deal, although there are some nuances there. Let's just talk about this whole pharmacy approach for a second. So basically what they're saying is, well, these products would be for short-term minor treatment of minor ailments, but because someone could be on medication and there's fears of young persons purchasing them, the pharmacies, according to this report, would be the best for them. So I'll pose this question. Do you think that's the right way to go about things if these actually regulations come to fruition? Or would you rather see 7-Eleven, the gas station, and every grocery store in Canada selling these products? Or would you rather just keep them in the current regulatory sphere, which is retailers across Canada? So this is the last one. Keep it short, 1 or 2 minutes per point, max, and then we'll get into the Q&A. Thanks.
I can tackle it. From my perspective, I think that I'll take, any other distribution channels as a win. So, if pharmacies are one more channel to access the product, I'll take that as a win. In an ideal situation, I don't agree generally with the principle that it should only be available in pharmacies, because that's what the Scientific Advisory Committee report suggests. But I'll take any win to add additional distribution channels. Ideally, in terms of what the population wants, people want to be able to go on Amazon and buy it, or go to their corner store or gas station and pick it up. I don't think we're going to get there anytime soon, but I'll take an additional channel as a win.
And there's, just to add to that, I think there's a nuanced ability to have smart regulations here. Right now, we're talking very binary. First of all, we're talking about CHPs, which will be able to make a claim, right? So, but I think there is an ability to maybe have a smarter approach where maybe if you've got a CHP with a limit with more, say, than 100 milligrams, or say less than 50 milligrams, you can buy it outside of pharmacy. I think there's an ability to apply some real scientific rigor and risk to what the product is, the particular product is, the CHP, to where it can be sold, right? I can see the logic in having pharmacies being involved in a CHP conversation, but don't forget the reality of the situation will be that next door, you could go get isolate in the cannabis store. So there's a bit of academic positioning here, I'd say, but there may be a way to have a smarter regulation going, well, okay, if you're combining with X and Y other NHPs and making a Y claim and your CBD is over 100 milligrams in per dose or per day on that dosing, well, then maybe you have to have a pharmacy. I can go either way on this, but I think it's more nuanced than yes or no. Don't forget, NHPs exist today in gas stations. Your Halls are NHP, your toothpaste is NHP. Anything very often with a claim is an NHP. So I think there's a smart approach to this.
I mean, keep in mind as well that there's lots of NHP brands already existing out there that are just itching to produce the with CBD version of their already approved NHPs. And I'm sure they're expecting to be able to put those products right beside all of their existing products, or they would like to be able to do so anyway. And it's kind of hard to justify why there would be more restrictions on where those with CBD versions of existing NHPs could be sold. But this may be one of these areas where we have to take what we can get to start and then try, expanding the scope down the road, as we've done in many other ways with the cannabis regulatory framework.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Trina. Thanks, Shane. Thanks, Deepak. That was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. I'd like to spend the last 5-10 minutes going through some questions, some which we've kind of answered throughout our discussion here, so I will not dwell on those. For example, Roderick asked a question or comment about the psychoactive versus non-psychoactive kind of approach, and Deepak did talk about that. We've talked about the minor cannabinoids. So again, I think we all feel that there's probably a demand for CBN in the same kind of ecosystem that we're discussing CBD could be in. But I think let's look at one of these questions here. So Trina, you said you're going to answer this question live. Doesn't matter where CBD would come from, cannabis or hemp. If you want to take a few seconds or a minute to answer that, or anything that's strain specific, then by all means go.
Yeah, I think I already did. I did make a point earlier to talk about that basically, again, once you harvest those flowering heads, as a hemp farmer, you can only sell it to a processor. Processor doesn't matter where it came from. It's cannabis now.
Awesome. And then a follow-up on that from the same audience member, Siva, Excise Act, no implications for this, for CBD products anyways, right?
No indication in the report, no. I mean, I'm assuming CRA and finance will want their GST, HST on CHPs.
Yeah, there's a long established fight for removal of GST, HST from NHPs, which has not borne any fruit for decades.
But interesting question, how it'll be treated from an excise duty perspective too, not just GST, HST. So
I have another question here from Ben asking about imported CBD or outsourcing manufacture outside of Canada. Any speculation on if this were to go through, or 2 years down the road we have some sort of regulatory framework? Do you see Health Canada or Canada federal government budging on our limits on CBD import and export?
Well, this is one of those bigger conversations, right? We have to change the structural aspect of the Cannabis Act in the way that it's currently defined, right? Because, what is cannabis, and the way the Cannabis Act is defined includes CBD, and, are we now going to remove it from that process, and how are we going to allow it, and how much are we going to allow? Are we going to do 0.1%? The recommendation for the committee says up to 1 milligrams of THC to be included. So where are we going to land on that threshold? How does it apply to UN treaties? I think there's a much bigger conversation around Health Canada philosophically making structural changes to the Act and how they interpret the Act before they can allow imports. I mean, I think we can have a full session and a webinar on imports, not just of CBD, but cannabis generally, including THC. But yeah, that's my observation on this.
Well, what will be super interesting, imports is fascinating, but exports for me are even more fascinating because right here you will have a structure for NHPs or CHPs, which could align very well to a UK version of what they're doing with CBD, but yet we won't be able to export into that market, which is a big market, and Canada is a trusted Commonwealth, country jurisdiction into that market. So it will be interesting. I understand why they can't, and it goes back to the UN side of things. But really, you've got two jurisdictions that have deregulated the same concept to a point where it's pretty freely available. All you're doing is shipping.
We've got to have it taken off the prescription drug list first, though.
I mean, the policy on importation of medical cannabis right now with Health Canada is, the reasons being given for the denials of import permits of any amount for commercial sale within the medical channels is, number one, because we don't have any way to track that cannabis once it's imported to ensure that it stays within the medical channels. And number two, we don't have any way to ensure that all stages of cultivation and production of that product met or exceeded the GPP standards that we have for cannabis products in Canada. So, I can expect that even if we're looking at CHPs, we'd have to kind of take those same considerations and build an argument around importation for those.
Okay, so we're pretty much out of time. I do want to give an opportunity for each of you to either pick one of the questions remaining here on our board if you wanted to answer them directly, or make a comment or add anything about the report or what we can expect next. The floor is yours. I'll give each of you 1 or 2 minutes. Maybe we'll go Deepak, Trina, and then Shane. And then, we'll wrap this up. So go ahead, Deepak.
Well, I'm sure Shane and Trina will have more to say on the timelines comment. I think I want to make everyone aware that this is not going to be a quick fix. I think this is quite an extended process. Obviously, we see a 70-day consultation. I very much encourage everybody and anybody that's interested in applying or interested in the CBD conversation to submit your feedback to Health Canada. It's not necessarily people that want to be in the business. It could be anybody and what their thoughts are on this issue. So rather than tweet about it or complain about it online, I think the most effective way that you have to submit your feedback is to actually participate and email the link that's on the consultation page. I would encourage people to provide that feedback for sure. This is not going to be a quick process. I think this is going to be, at a minimum, we're looking at 24 months, if that. And I think there's probably going to have to be more alignment around some of the changes for the Cannabis Act, which also I think is going to be a great webinar that we'll do in the coming future. But I think it's going to be, as I said, a lot of structural changes are needed to the Cannabis Act. And so I think this is going to be wrapped up into a much broader kind of change that Health Canada is going to do. So please don't expect anything quick to happen here.
Thanks, Deepak. Trina, floor is yours. Any last comments or answer any questions on the board?
Well, I see there was a question about topicals. So, I can say just very briefly that there was just a passing reference to the fact that the committee didn't feel there was enough evidence on other routes of administration through topicals like creams and ointments and things of that nature, and that further evidence was required. So I think that's why it wasn't explicitly included in the recommendations, but a valid point that I think we would expect that a CHP category would definitely include topical products. And it would make infinitely more sense to me that I would buy a CBD cream in a pharmacy as opposed to in a cannabis retail store.
Absolutely. Thanks, Trina. Shane, as always, you get the last word.
It's very, very rare. I can tell you that. I've got 2 kids. The issue for me is, I think it's not just commenting on the actual comment period that Health Canada has put in place, which is very important. I also think communicating to your elected officials, making this a policy issue. The industry writ large, all the way through the value chain, is losing millions, if not billions per year on this delay. And if it's going to go for another 24 months, that's going to be a 7-year process to get something on, available to consumers that basically is not a huge jump from what they did in 2 years to have CBD available on, in cannabis stores. So we have to create more pressure to make this a priority. I can tell you that regulations can be made very quickly. Whether they're good or not is a different question. But I would argue that there has been a lot of foot dragging on this to date by Health Canada, and we need to make sure that the political masters, not the bureaucratic masters, understand that time is of the essence, and we're losing competitiveness across the board, nationally and internationally.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, I agree. The industry's under a lot of pressure. A lot of it has been invested. We just keep seeing delays and missed opportunities, I think. And you're right. Lobby your local politicians. Politics is local. Let them know. Don't just go on Twitter like we often always do. You can do that to rally support and obviously get a plan in place. But it's very important that the industry, who has historically been very bad at lobbying and messaging, really does a better job. And really all of us stakeholders as individuals talk to our local politicians. So Shane, Deepak, and Trina, really happy to have you on here. I think we're both happy to see this report, but kind of disappointed it took so long and some of the content in there. All we can do now is provide feedback in the short term, like Deepak suggested, and then long term, keep the pressure on. So on behalf of our members and our board of directors, thank you so much for joining us. Audience, thank you so much for joining us and hearing us. And again, we'll post this on our YouTube channel in the coming days. Have a great day, everyone, and stay safe and have a great summer. Take care.
Thank you.